Last week I was down in Southern California driving the all-new Audi Q5. This week I'm at home with laryngitis, but look what was waiting for me, the all-new Audi Q6 e-tron. You can think of this as, basically, Audi's electric Q5. Sort of, because this shares nothing with that gasoline model in terms of structure, although it does share some screens and some seats on the inside. This is actually the close Audi relative to the Porsche Macan. And with the Macan, it shares its 800-volt electrical architecture, but more on that a little bit later. The big deal with the Q6 is that this really is trying to slot in the lineup as the electric alternative to the Q5. Those are some really big shoes to fill, because the Q5 isn't just currently the best-selling Audi in America, it is the best-selling Audi of all time, even though it's only been on sale for a relatively short period of time. So with that in mind, let's talk about the Q6 e-tron and why you might or might not want to get this if you're shopping for that new Q5, because there's a lot in common, but there's certainly some key differences as well. Some of you might be wondering, isn't 6 bigger than 5? Doesn't that mean that this is in fact a bigger SUV than the Audi Q5? Well, yes and no. We have to talk about Audi's alphabet soup here for just 1 second. Once upon a time, really not that long ago actually, Audi decided that electric models should have even numbers, so Q6, Q8, Q4, etc. And then ICE models should have odd numbers, which is why the Audi A4 has been replaced by the Audi A5. Then they decided, no, hang on, that was confusing people, so we're just going to stick with some of the numbers and names as they have already been assigned, but moving forward, that won't necessarily be the case. And that's why the Q6 e-tron really is the corollary to the gasoline Q5 e-tron, and they're even available in the same formats, regular SUV and sportback both. Dimensionally, yes, this is a bit bigger, and price tag-wise, yes, it is a bit bigger as well, but that will largely depend on where you're shopping for a Q6 or a Q5 around the world, because in some markets those prices could be a lot closer together. Looks-wise though, they're definitely very similar. They have their own unique look, but they're instantly recognizable as an Audi, and this is the one that led the charge. The Q5 actually came a little bit later in terms of design, scheduling, and that's why its front end looks quite like this, only of course with more cooling, because it has a regular engine under there. As you'd expect from Audi, not only do we have their latest LED lighting technology, we also have their latest LED DRL tech, where you have adjustable light patterns in this module above, depending on the trim you're talking about. Some models will also have an adjustable OLED display in the back. The different patterns and their animations on startup are selected here on the infotainment screen on the inside. Rather unfortunately, you have to turn the vehicle off after you set it in order to get it to start displaying the new theme. The most expensive versions of the Q6, well, the SQ6, will get an OLED display integrated into the rear taillight module. That's in addition to the LEDs that you see here, and the pattern on that multi-segment display can be updated in the same way as the DRLs up front. The configurable taillights are definitely cool, not cool enough for me to want to spend the extra cash if it was a standalone option, mind you, but definitely really interesting. Now, dimensionally, again, this is really close to the Q5, but it is a little bit bigger. It's 187.8 inches from tail to tip, about the same size as a Tesla Model Y. The big difference between this and the Q5 is that we get a bit more cargo room in the back, we get a little bit more headroom, because it's actually quite upright for an electric SUV rather than having a low-slung roof like so many of the other options, and we get a little teeny tiny storage area under the hood that we'll take a look at in a bit. In addition to the Model Y, direct competitors would be the Cadillac Lyriq, the Cadillac Optiq, even though the Lyriq and Optiq are both larger than this. The Lyriq is actually a whopping 9 inches longer. Based on price though, this is right in the same neighborhood. This starts at $63,800, so pretty similar to the Lyriq, the ZDX, the Polestar 3, also something along the lines of the recently refreshed Lexus RZ. Just like the Q5 I was recently driving, this Q6 has an adaptive air suspension, so it's definitely tuned towards the softer side of the segment. But we do have staggered tires, wider tires in the back, narrower tires up front, because all Q6 models are going to send the majority of their power, or all their power, to the rear wheels. The base tire setup is 235 up front, 255 in the rear on a 19-inch wheel. This has the optional 20-inch wheel package on the Q6, 255s up front, 285s in the rear, same tire size that we find standard on the SQ6, and then optional on the SQ6 is a unique 21-inch wheel. The wide rear tires definitely give this an aggressive stance from the rear. We again have those full LED taillight modules back here with progressive turn signals. No fake exhaust tips or anything like that going on at the bottom of the bumper, and thankfully Audi has ditched the fake exhaust tips going forward because the new Q5 has real exhaust tips that are actually functional in every trim. We have a small windshield wiper back there and a pretty conventionally opening hatch here. Again, you can get the sportback version of the Q6 if you want something a bit swoopier, but the big reason to get this over the Q5 is that we get about 3 cubic feet more cargo capacity back here. Since this one has the adaptive air suspension, we can press this little button here, and eventually the vehicle will lower itself down in the rear to help you load cargo a little bit easier in the back. The cargo area, though, it's very conventionally shaped. That's definitely one of the things I appreciate about this model and something that separates it from a lot of the competition. As you can see, a 22-inch roller bag could go in this position upright and still have the hatch closed, and you could put even more cargo behind it or in front of it. Also, if I lift up the load floor, there is some available storage space underneath. Now, it's not the largest cargo well I've ever seen, and part of it is occupied by the subwoofer, but it is a place where you could put your can of Fix-A-Flat, your charge cable, or other little knickknacks as well. Audi gives us mounting locations for a roller-style cargo cover, and a place to store that cargo cover under the load floor when it's not in use. But I think they could have packaged some of these electronics somewhere else and given us a slightly larger cargo area, so that is a bit of a missed opportunity. On the other hand, the 40-20-40 folding rear seat back is something that you don't find in a lot of the competition. Under the hood, we have a very eccentrically shaped storage area. We have this deep storage well up front where you could definitely put a book bag, a laptop bag, or maybe a gym bag. But then we have this big flat expanse that's also part of the sealed storage area. Honestly, this is here probably just to make the storage area look better on paper. It's over 2 cubic feet here. You could put maybe a pizza, balance it on this little divider in that area, but other than that, it's not overly useful. Of course, it is more useful than the frunk in the Lyriq because the Lyriq doesn't give you a front trunk at all. This model is the dual motor Q6, so we have a 120 horsepower motor living under that area as well, but you don't get any extra space if you choose the rear-wheel drive Q6. And yes, there is a rear-wheel drive Q6 available that gets a single motor in the back, 302 horsepower or 322 horsepower when you're using launch control and you get that extra boost. This one bumps that up to 422 horsepower or 456 with launch control. The SQ6 bumps that even further up to 483 horsepower or 509 horsepower with launch control. Both models, well, actually all the models, use essentially the same battery pack. It's a 100 kilowatt hour battery with components that are shared with that Porsche. 94.4 kilowatt hours of the pack is usable, and the nominal voltage is 800 volts. But unlike some new EVs that won't be able to charge at 400 volt stations, this will. But there's a bit of a twist versus what we find in, for instance, the e-tron GT or a Porsche Taycan that are also 800 volt EVs. Instead of an onboard DC converter, which we find in some EVs, this has the ability to split the pack and then present it to the charging station as a paralleled 400 volt pack. That allows this to charge at a peak rate of 135 kilowatts, but if you find an 800 volt native station, like a select number of V4 superchargers or pretty much all the high output 350 kilowatt CCS stations, this will charge at a peak rate of 270 kilowatts and will go from 10% to 80% in just 21 minutes. That's a very impressive time when you consider that the pack is really quite large. A little bit less impressive is the AC charge time because this has an onboard 9.6 kilowatt charger rather than the 11.5 kilowatt charger that we find in a lot of the competition. On the other hand, Audi gives us 2 charge port locations, which is kind of cool, one on each side of the back of the vehicle. The one on the driver's side will AC charge or DC charge. The one on the passenger side is AC charging only. The front seats are nearly identical to the ones in the Q5. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support here, manual extending thigh cushion, pretty aggressive bolsters for the seat bottom and seat back cushion. I find those very comfortable, but if you're larger than I am, you might find them a little bit restrictive. We have a powered tilt telescopic memory-linked steering wheel, and interestingly, no adjustability for the head restraints. The big difference between this and the Q5 is that the front seats are a little bit higher off the ground, so if you really like sitting low, you might want to go for that gas model, but if you prefer a more commanding view of the road, you'll actually get a little bit higher off the ground in this than in the Q5, and we find a little bit more headroom, something that's unusual for EV counterparts in a manufacturer's lineup. Oftentimes when a manufacturer gives us an electric model and a gasoline model, whether that's a converted gasoline model into electric or a dedicated electric platform, oftentimes headroom suffers. Not so in the Q6. And that's really obvious in the back, where we find notably more headroom than we find in the Q5. Sitting back here, I have maybe about 1.5 inches of room left. It's a pretty comfortable back seat, definitely less restrictive than some of the competition. The rear bench, though, it's definitely bucket-shaped, so if you want to put someone in the middle, they're sitting a lot higher off the ground, and there is a little bit of a hump right there for the battery cables, etc. This is a dedicated EV platform, but not all dedicated EV platforms have a completely flat floor. It just depends on how the manufacturer chooses to package things like cooling systems, cables, things like that, whether they put them around the battery or protected right there down the middle. We have heated rear seats, 3-zone automatic climate control, air vents in the back. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, so you will notice the one downside versus the Q5. It does lose a little bit of legroom. In the Q5, that seat could be moved a little bit further forward and give the passenger the same room that we find in this model. We have pull-up sunshades, well integrated into the rear doors. Apparently I have troubles actually locking that. There we go. I can figure it out. We have a big panoramic moonroof right there, and we find rear seats, again, that Ford 40-20-40 style. On the child seat anchor front, we have latch anchors in the outboard seating positions only, although we do have a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back cushion, not out of the ceiling, so it's going to be easier to keep a child seat in the middle well centered. And the buckles shouldn't interfere with each other, even with some of those slightly larger child seats. The latch anchor covers, these are kind of interesting because they roll up like that back into the seat, so there's no lid to lose, and you can actually find that anchor pretty easily. If you thought the interior was identical to the one in the new Q5, don't worry, I'll forgive you, because they are very, very similar with a lot of the same components, but the layout is subtly different. Let's start out our look, though, by going up here, because we find an actual panoramic moonroof that opens. There are the controls right up there. So if you're looking for an EV with a moonroof that actually vents, you'll find one here, and you won't find that at any price in a Tesla Model Y. Moving back there, we find LED lights for the rear passengers, grab handles for everybody, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and fixed in-place head restraints. These do look like they're adjustable, but they don't in fact move up or forwards and backwards. The upholstery is perforated because the front seats are heated and ventilated, and you can see that we have just a little bit of subtle contrasting stitching going on there as well. Here's a better look at the front seat bolstering, and as a result of their aggressive shape, you can see passengers have been sitting on them as they get in and out, so that is a crease line on both of those bolsters, not a shadow on the interior. Moving over to the front doors, we find hard plastics at the bottom of the door, soft touch materials on the upper section of the door, and definitely a very similar tiered motif to what we find on the Q5, where things wrap around and stick out a little bit on top, and then in this midsection, and then out for that armrest there as well. Moving over to the dashboard, we find a little bit of wood trim on the dash. I like Audi's subtle nod to wood on the inside, something that a lot of EVs are skipping these days, but I'm not the biggest fan necessarily of the passenger screen. This is a bit more useful than some vehicles' passenger screens because it runs Audi's latest software, so you can do things like streaming media, you can also do games on here, you can download other apps, but there's no smartphone projection here, so you can't get like multi-screen CarPlay or anything along those lines. The bigger problem for me is that if you don't get the screen, then the dashboard looks exactly like that, basically screaming to everybody, hey, you didn't pay extra for that screen option. They don't replace it with any sort of soft touch material or anything. You just get a big black piece of plastic. Now, definitely not a big black piece of plastic is the fantastic OLED screen right here in the center, and of course over here for the instrument cluster. This two-screen setup uses organic LED technology to give you a display that doesn't look overly bright at night. It also gives you really deep blacks and just better imaging quality as well. If you've been inside, for instance, something like a Chevy Blazer EV at night with that really huge screen in the dashboard, even when the display is really dim, it's not really that dim. It's very bright because it's a traditional LCD. Down here we have touch buttons for the HVAC system, lots of voice commandability, same sort of ability to download apps here, although obviously you wouldn't be able to stream things from YouTube unless you were parked. On the driver's side, we have the latest look for Audi's LCD instrument cluster, but I think it's actually a little bit less snazzy, I would say, than some of their previous designs, because we don't have big moving map displays or anything like that. We then have the big full-color head-up display. The binnacle arrangement is a little bit different than we find in the Q5, but the twin screen setup in the dashboard is basically the same as the gasoline model, as is the steering wheel and the steering wheel controls, paddles on the back as well. Only here, these are regenerative braking paddles, not shift paddles. The buttons on the steering wheel are a combination of physical and touch buttons. As you can see, this entire button module moves, and then the system knows what you want by where exactly you've touched on this. As far as touch button modules go, I think these actually work really well because these indents or protrusions from this section really help you define where your finger is. It's actually pretty easy to know without looking at it. On the other hand, the shiny black plastic is probably going to scratch pretty easily over time. Behind that, we have the turn signal stock. It's also where we find the controls for the lane centering. Cruise control, that's on a stock right down there. As you can see, it's a 4-spoke design. To the left of the steering wheel, we find a storage cubby that's big enough for a decent number of smartphones or other knickknacks that you might want to put in there. And speaking of about the same size as a smartphone, check out this button array on the driver's side door. We have lock and unlock, headlight controls, kind of an odd place for your headlight controls, including the Audi all-weather light there. Controls for the side view mirrors, folding them, unfolding them, your seat memory controls, and independent buttons for the rear child seat locks on the rear doors. Then we have 4 window switches back here. The result of this is that, like the Q5, this entire door module ends up being quite chunky. For my hand size, it actually feels already a little bit on the large side, but if you're a smaller person, you're really just going to be grabbing that and pulling without actually holding on to anything substantial. I do kind of wish that was a little bit narrower. Now, coming back to the center of the dashboard, we start to see more differences between this and the Q5 because the center console is a little bit different. We have a deep storage well here because no transmission was designed to fit in this area, so we have a lot more space available. We have the same sort of USB ports there, very similar drive select button, that's our drive mode button, and that takes us over to this page over here on the infotainment system where you can actually adjust it further. We have toggles and the button for the infotainment system, so track forward, backward, and volume and power. I am a little bit worried about that location because drinks will splash on that area if you do spill them here, but the same thing would go for this joystick-style shifter on this side. As with the Q5, you pull down for drive, B is enhanced regenerative braking, we then have park as that button right there. The cup holders are definitely nice and large though, so you can easily put those large takeout drinks there. We also get this ratchet-style armrest that I really love in modern Audis. If you like resting your arm or your elbow here as you drive along, this is a lot more comfortable than those really low-slung ones you find in other vehicles. Because we don't have a transmission under there, we have a lot more storage space. You can see the instruction manual, that is completely under that area where we have the cup holders, and then we get all of that additional storage space. Then back over here, we have a bin-style glove compartment where you could just barely put a small tablet computer, but some of the 11-inch ones wouldn't fit in there. As we get this out on the road, keep in mind that 0 to 60 times are going to be dependent on battery state of charge and whether or not you're using the launch control mode. Because in order to get peak power and peak torque out of this EV system, you have to use launch control. To use it, we put the drive select over here into dynamic mode, then we turn the traction control to the limited mode, then we go for a complete stop, both feet on the pedals, and then release the brake pedal. We then get maximum acceleration, and this model ran 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds, as long as the battery was above 80% state of charge. At 50% state of charge, we ran 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds, and that continued all the way down to 20% state of charge, where things started to drop a little bit further. Also fairly impressive is the 60 to 0 stopping distance of 118 feet. Keep in mind this model does not have high performance tires on it or anything like that. At the launch event, I had estimated this would be somewhere around 135 feet. Turns out I was wrong. This actually stops a lot shorter than I had suspected. Now, if you want to take things to the next level, there is the SQ6. That will obviously go 0 to 60 faster than this, thanks to having more power on board, and it has grippier tires, so it's probably going to stop a little bit shorter as well. But keep in mind that the mission of this is to target the Q5 shopper, people that are already interested in an Audi that might want to go electric, maybe capture a few people that have looked at Audi before, but Audi didn't have an EV that was the right size or the right fit for them. And in that comparison, this is extremely good. It does take a little bit longer to stop than certain versions of the Q5, but it is definitely going to be faster 0 to 60 than the SQ5, and then of course if you want to go even faster than that, there is the SQ6. Rather sadly, I have not been able to get my hands on the single motor model of this, but I suspect it's probably going to be a bit quicker than the 6.3 seconds that Audi is estimating. That model gets over 300 horsepower, of course still has launch control. The front motor is not overly powerful. It's only about 120 horsepower here, and that's why this actually doesn't have torque steer on roads like this. It has a very strong rear power bias all the time. So this is actually more fun than the Q5 or SQ5 in my estimation, because those just don't have a rear power bias quite like this. This can get significantly more tail happy than even an SQ5. When it comes to the handling score, I'm going to give this an A-, bearing in mind this does not have really grippy summer tires or anything like that. But when it comes to the ride score, it's absolutely an A+. Audi does an excellent job tuning their air suspensions, and if I were to pick one company to tune an air suspension and I had to stick with that one air suspension tune, it would probably be Audi. Volvos sometimes feel a little bit brittle, some of the Mercedes models can feel a little bit too floaty-boaty, other vehicles can feel bouncy, I guess, for lack of a better description, and some can feel downright peculiar, like even Rivian's latest air suspension tune. The Audi air suspensions, whether we're talking about an EV or a gasoline vehicle, they just have a really, really good balance of different priorities there. Now, on the cabin noise score, bearing in mind that the road surface was recently repaved that we test on, we measured 60.5 decibels. This is a bit quieter than a Q5, largely because of the battery pack location, so it does seem to isolate the cabin a little bit more than the gasoline model. Fuel efficiency, though, that could be a bit better. Over the last 1,100 miles, and I don't know how many drivers, a bunch of people driving this, 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. That's put the real world range below 250 miles, maybe 240 miles or something like that. In my week of driving, I averaged 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which puts the average above 250 miles. And if I treated it very gently, I got 3 miles per kilowatt hour, kept the top speed to below 65 miles an hour. On a longer road trip, that could be a bit of a bummer, but you could get about 300 miles out of this all-wheel drive model. If you want the most efficiency and the longest range, and you're willing to give up all-wheel traction and performance, because that's going to be about 2 seconds slower 0 to 60, you could get the single motor model. That's going to bump you over 3 miles per kilowatt hour. But honestly, I probably wouldn't do that unless I was just looking for the least expensive Q6, because this charges so rapidly that it's just not a big deal.
As of the time that we're recording this video, the tax credit still exists for some of the vehicles on this list, but by the time you watch this video, it is probably going to be well and truly dead, because it has recently been killed off thanks to a recent law passed by Congress and signed, of course, by the president. That means actually a little bit more even footing for all of the options that you see here, because formerly the Model Y, the ZDX, the Lyriq, etc., they had a tax credit, and there was hope that maybe some of these other options would get one as well. But now they're all basically in the same boat. And well, not exactly the same boat, because something like a Model Y is definitely less expensive and a bit more mainstream than some of these options, but absolutely has to be on this list. And something like a Mercedes EQE SUV or a BMW iX, they're quite a bit more expensive than the Audi Q6. And that is an interesting twist, because we're kind of used to, in the gasoline world at least, Audi, BMW, and Mercedes having models that very directly compete with one another. Mercedes has been, of course, trying to go more upmarket lately and really ramp up those MSRPs, but by and large in the gas lineups, they have models that are really very, very close MSRP-wise. But as you can see, the EQE SUV goes up to $138,000, and it practically starts where the Q6 ends. Very similar with the BMW iX, but we do have that Polestar. Now, instead of going into all of these one at a time or just the top highlights, let's kind of go down the list and talk about which ones I would get over the other. One of the big reasons to get the Q6 is that it charges very rapidly, and that's thanks to the electrical system that's basically shared with the Porsche lineup. This is the next generation of the Volkswagen Audi Porsche group's 800-volt architecture that really pays dividends when it comes to the charge rates. 270 kilowatts is definitely very, very speedy, and that puts it solidly ahead of the Model Y and the Polestar 3, which are two of the fastest charging EVs in this segment outside the Audi and, of course, the Porsche, which again is kind of in another another price realm, which is why it wasn't on that chart to begin with. Of course, if you're looking for something that charges very slowly, you could look at that Lexus RZ. They have given it more range, more power, and a NACS connector for 2026, but they haven't really addressed some of those core charging complaints on that model. We won't be talking about it too much here because we haven't driven it yet, but hopefully that's coming up soon. Now let's just go down this list and I'll talk about which ones I might buy over the Audi Q6 or not. The Tesla Model Y? I don't think so. I think I would probably get the Audi over the Model Y if you could afford it, because it's more unique and it's certainly more luxurious. It also charges a little bit faster, but the uniqueness and the luxury brand, those are obviously reasons to get it over the Model Y. The Model Y is pretty common. It's practically turning into sort of the electric Camry, at least here in the San Francisco Bay Area for sure. The Acura ZDX? Maybe. You know, I know the ZDX has been seen as a little weird looking, and it's not a real Acura because it's really just a General Motors SUV that has an Acura logo on it. But I kind of like the styling, and I sort of like the ability to get it at an Acura dealer where you're going to have a better dealer experience. And the top-end versions with the air suspension have a really nice ride to them. So I might get the ZDX over the Q6, depending on exactly what you're looking for. Just keep in mind, it's not going to charge very rapidly. That is one of the downsides. The Genesis GV70 electrified, or electrified GV70 at any rate, I like the look of this a lot, and this is another maybe depending on your use case. You need to make sure that your trips are relatively short, or if you do plan on road tripping, you're willing to stop pretty regularly. It does charge very rapidly, but the range is pretty short because this is a modified ICE platform, and that makes it different than most of the other vehicles we're talking about here. It shares so much with the gasoline GV70 that there are some disadvantages: rear seat legroom, cargo room, etc. But I think on the other hand, it looks fantastic, and the front seats are definitely very comfortable, and I think the interior is really nicely done. Cadillac Lyriq? Oddly, yes. I think the Lyriq is the weird sort of benchmark in this segment because it is selling really well, so all things must be compared against the Lyriq in a way. It also has been around for a while and has a proven history to it. It doesn't charge terribly rapidly like the ZDX. It uses the same motors and batteries, etc. But we now have a Lyriq V if you want to go a little bit faster, and there are the longer range versions of the Lyriq as well. Basically, it's really easy to live with, and there are tons of configurations, not to mention still some deals out there. The Mercedes-Benz EQE, no, it's just too expensive. I also don't exactly care for the Jelly Bean format, and the interior, you know, I don't know if it feels $100,000, let alone $138,000. The BMW iX, it does feel more premium, and it's really cool that it uses their more advanced space-age technology for the carbon fiber body, etc., things like that. But it is also really expensive, so I don't think I would get that over the Audi. Polestar 3, though, I probably would, because it feels more luxurious and more refined inside. The attention to detail and the styling I think I like better in the Polestar 3. I also really like the dual motor model with the torque vectoring axle in the back. That's a really cool touch. It's nice and roomy on the inside. There are a few downsides to the Polestar. It's not easily available everywhere. Service might be tricky if you're in a smaller area in the United States. Also, efficiency is on the low side, but charging has been ramping up, so they've actually released some software updates that have improved charging. And again, I like the way that it drives. Also, fantastic deals right now. They're at least $10,000 off most of the Polestar 3s all across the US. We also have to talk about the Jeep Wagoneer S. I know it's kind of weird to talk about a Jeep in this group, but it is about the same price as everything here. I don't think I would get the Wagoneer. As much fun as it is to spin all four tires, there's something unrefined about it for its price tag. But that's kind of what you'd expect out of a Jeep. It's like the Grand Cherokee. Yes, it's priced like some of these German options, but it's not going to be as refined. It really depends on whether you want to risk being the guinea pig for Jeep's first American market EV or not. You know, I don't know if I would do that, but there are some really fantastic deals on it. We're talking about $15,000 off in some areas of the country. If you could get $15,000 to $20,000 off your Wagoneer S, you know, maybe I would do it. The range and efficiency are definitely solid. The functionality is good. They're just, you know, it's too many things are just not exactly quite right on that Wagoneer for me to choose it over the other options here. How about the Lexus RZ? Well, bearing in mind we haven't driven it yet, I would say it's also on the no list because of the slow charging, the relatively low range, and the performance. All of those have been improved for 2026. Charging, that's tricky. The peak charge rate hasn't been improved, but they say we should be more readily hitting that charge rate. We'll have to see, though. Lexus is definitely going in a very conservative engineering direction with the RZ, and that's not exactly what I want in an electric vehicle, oddly enough. I appreciate it, but I think that a lot of electric car shoppers want something that's a little bit more adventurous and not quite as conservative as the RZ. Also, apparently you won't be getting the steer-by-wire system with the yoke steering wheel, or steering yoke rather, except in the European market. Looks like they're going to be getting it, and they haven't made any decisions on bringing that to the US quite yet, even though they have been promising it for quite some time. So what do you think? Which ones would you choose over the Audi Q6? Did I get that list just about right, or did I get it completely wrong? Time to sound off down there in the comment section, and I'll see all of you later.